Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Tina Dev, and I am the Director of Programs for the National Opportunity to Learn campaign. I'd like to welcome you to our second OTL campaign webinar. If the page would advance. Solutions, not suspensions. How to go from MAD to movement building. This is the second in a series of webinars being offered by the National Opportunity to Learn campaign over the coming months. It is also taking place during the National Week of Action, sponsored by our friends at the Dignity in Schools campaign. The OTL campaign and Dignity in Schools have teamed up on an initiative calling for a nationwide moratorium on out-of-school suspensions called Solutions, Not Suspensions. During this week of action, advocates from across the country are raising their voices on the issue of school pushout and school lockout, demanding the need for solutions that bring about more positive school climates, restorative justice practices, and student, parent, educator, and community involvement in finding research-based solutions to deal with school discipline issues. To learn more about the Solutions Not Suspensions initiative, visit www.stopsuspensions.org. To find out about any activities taking place in your community during the National Week of Action, visit the Dignity in Schools website at www.dignityinschools.org. We encourage those of you who are new to the OTL campaign to stay connected with us and all that we are doing by subscribing to our bi-weekly newsletter, by liking us on Facebook, or following us on Twitter. At the end of the webinar, we'll show a slide with the information you'll need to help you do that. If you'd like to join the Twitter feed for this webinar, please use the hashtag that you see on the screen, hashtag SolutionsNotSuspensions. You can follow me at OTL Campaign DIR. You can follow the OTL campaign at OTL Campaign, or you can follow our friends at the Philadelphia Student Union and Youth United for Change, both members of Dignity in Schools and contributors to today's webinar. Philadelphia Student Union can be found at 215 Student Union, and Youth United for Change can be found at YUC Philly, and those names are all on the screen. Before we begin, let's deal with some necessary housekeeping issues. First, if you are hearing my voice and seeing a screenshot slide of your computer, you are logged in correctly to our webinar software. If you experience any technical problems during the webinar, please use the chat function, which can be found on the right of your screen. At the drop-down menu, giving you options for recipients for your chat message, pull down the name Andrea Garvey. Today I'm playing the role of Andrea Garvey, so I will be the person who will be troubleshooting all of your technical questions. If it takes me a minute to get to you, just know that we're multitasking, but I will get to you as soon as I can. If you have any questions that you'd like to pose to the presenters, you can ask them via the chat function at the right. Again, choose Andrea's name from the pull-down menu, and I'll do what I can to get your questions asked during the Q&A period. If you want to share thoughts and ideas with other participants throughout the webinar, make sure to choose all participants from the pull-down menu, and you can interact with each other through the chat function. Today, we're happy to bring you our presenters. Hiram Rivera is the Executive Director of the Philadelphia Student Union, and we also have with us Daniel Losen, who's the Director of the Center for Civil Rights Remedies at the Civil Rights Project at UCLA. I'm now going to go ahead and turn this over to Hiram.
Okay. Can you see the slide?
Hold on just a second. Hiram, it's all yours.
Okay, great. So what I'm going to do is just quickly break down 2 years' worth of work that we in Philadelphia are doing here around the issue of school discipline, specifically the code of conduct that we won, a new code of conduct that we won here in Philadelphia. So before that, I'd like to start out with just a little bit of context in terms of who are the main folks involved in the work in the campaign that we were running for the past 2 years. So over 17 years, the youth at the Philadelphia Student Union and
Hiram?
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I can't see your screen yet.
Okay. Give me 1 second, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
Can you see it now?
Now, go ahead.
Okay, great. I'm sorry, buddy. So what I'm going to do is offer some. This is working for me now. I'm sorry. Okay. So the context. So for over 17 years, the Philadelphia Student Union and Youth United for Change have been working in the city of Philadelphia around organizing young people to be change makers in their school and for the Philadelphia school system. And primarily been doing that, organizing them to improve the school climate and end push-out that led to dropouts, right? Dropouts here in Philadelphia. Even at the same time, the Education Law Center and the ACLU have been working to represent young people and protect their rights during the disciplinary processes that they've encountered. So those are suspension hearings, those are expulsion hearings, when young people are arrested, all of those things. What led to us really needing a new code of conduct was it was response to policies that came out, specifically after a couple of events that happened in Philadelphia that gained national attention. So specifically, the first one was in 2009, was what was referred to as the riot at South Philadelphia High School, where what happened was groups of Asian students were attacked by predominantly African-American students in South Philadelphia High School. This was played out in the media as a race riot. It lasted all day. It started out with a couple of fights in the morning and just led on to a full-on riot at the school by sometime in the mid-time of the day. This gained national attention and raised the issue of school discipline, school violence in the city of Philadelphia. The second one was the summer in 2010, when again Philadelphia made national news with its flash mobs. And these aren't the dancing type of flash mobs, but this was, again, as was stated in the media, roving bands of young people, particularly down on South Street, which is a major strip here in Philadelphia, who were just randomly attacking pedestrians. And what was said to me was randomly, black young people randomly attacking white pedestrians in the streets, again, raising this issue of youth violence in Philadelphia up on a national level. Because Philly was getting so much national attention because of these instances of youth violence, zero tolerance policies were created and heavily enforced here at the school district. Those were primarily created by then embattled Superintendent Arlene Ackerman and a Safe Schools Advocate, which is appointed by the state, because the Philadelphia school system is state-controlled, the state-controlled school system. In response to what was happening, to the media attention, to the portrayal of young people in Philadelphia that was being played out on a national level, then the policy responses that were happening in the school district, 10 organizations in the city came together to form the Campaign for Nonviolent Schools. The Campaign for Nonviolent Schools is a coalition of organizations that work together to address the root causes of violence. So not just to, look at ways to prevent violence in schools, but to go deeper and to figure out why this violence is happening in the first place. So in the case of South Philadelphia High School, what happened was, during those riots, the Asian students formed the boycott and didn't go back to school for a week. A lot of the community organizations in their neighborhoods got together to support those young people and worked with the Philadelphia Student Union to try to resolve this issue and try to build bridges again and try to get at what happened at South Philadelphia High School and what can we do about it. The reason being is because we have chapters in 7 high schools, in 7 neighborhood high schools here in Philadelphia. South Philly was one of our chapter schools. That's where the Campaign for Nonviolent Schools comes about. So YUC, PSU, the two Asian organizations that were working with the students at South Philadelphia High School and other organizations got together to address the root causes. And what was found at South Philadelphia High School was that South Philadelphia High School is a grossly under-resourced school. The majority of the Asian students were English language learners. All the ELL students were given their own floor in South Philadelphia High School. To the other students, what it looked like was that those students were being given preferential treatment. They were given more resources. They were given a lot of the things to excel in school that the rest of the student population didn't have. Like a lot of the schools here in Philadelphia, the building was dilapidated, the bathrooms were no good, the water fountains don't work, air conditioners don't work. Therefore, in the summer times and the hotter days, schools in Philadelphia are shut down because it's too hot for students to go to school. If students who were not ELL students were to go onto the second floor where the ELL student classes were at, they would instantly be suspended and thrown out of school. This created a dynamic between the two student bodies rooted in grossly under-resourcing of the school and misinformation about who's getting what, who's not getting what. That unfortunately ended up exploding into this massive riot. But these tensions that were built and were growing and simmering that were rooted in the under-resourcing and underutilization of the building at South Philadelphia High School. The issue with the flash mobs was, again, an issue of under-resourcing and no services or no other means for young people in the city to be able to enjoy themselves, right, or go somewhere after school. So what happens is there's this tourist strip down in South Philadelphia. When you go down that strip, a lot of the stores and a lot of Dunkin' Donuts here in the city of Philadelphia have signs that say, will either say just blatantly, no young people allowed, or no young people allowed in groups of more than two, right? And there's these signs that just prohibit young people from being able to even go into stores in a lot of these places in South Philadelphia. Again, young people whose communities are under-resourced, who don't have a lot of services, who don't have a lot of, means for getting a job, means of, just doing something fun just to enjoy their lives, ended up being confronted with these signs and these policies that prevent young people from even entering stores. What happens is a couple fights erupt down in South Philly and gets blown up to a much bigger issue. But again, not addressing the structural violence, but the Campaign for Nonviolent Schools called it, the structural violence of under-resourcing, intentional under-resourcing and underfunding of our schools and our communities. And that's where that group was created. Because of a lot of the pushback that we were getting, because we're going up against the national media in terms of trying to paint a different picture of the young people and not portray young people as super predators or just these roving bands of violent teens, we needed to collect data and we needed to get those facts to support what we were saying, and specifically what the students were saying and calling for what they needed in their schools. So Youth United for Change worked with the Advancement Project to research suspension numbers and district spending on discipline. In the state of Pennsylvania, we have, and just like all the other states, there have been major cuts to education. So here in Pennsylvania, it's been hundreds of millions of dollars has been cut from education year after year, and that's a $600 million put into creating private prisons and expanding the prisons that we have here in Pennsylvania. A lot of the students felt that if that money was shifted and if the priority was put more on their education and their success, that you would see a decrease in violent outbursts or students acting out in the classroom or in their schools or out in their neighborhoods. That research was used to create their two reports that came out by PSU that was written, by YC, that was written with students and legal allies at the Advancement Project, which was called Zero Tolerance and Push Out. Zero Tolerance looked at the policies that led to the excessive suspensions in the Philadelphia School District, and the Push Out was dealing with the dropout crisis. At the same time, the Campaign for Nonviolent Schools was conducting citywide surveys of high school students regarding safety issues, what they needed, what they thought made a safe school, what they thought would contribute to reducing the numbers of suspensions, the numbers of fights, and all of those instances in school that could lead to a young person being kicked out of school or ultimately pushed out. The data, of course, confirmed that zero-tolerance policies and excessive use of out-of-school suspensions were just contributing to the school-to-prison pipeline. And like I said, here in Pennsylvania, the priority has been, at least at the state level, is to create more prisons, and it's been one of incarceration and not education. And this happens at the local level in the schools with the issues with school police, on-base, school-based arrests, off-grounds arrests by school police of young people. And again, young people feeling that those adults in power, their priorities are more about incarcerating them as opposed to educating them. So YUC's report, along with the Advancement Project, showed just how gross the issue of suspensions were here in Philadelphia. So as a part of those reports created by the young people at YUC, they included a list of demands. And in those demands, two of them stood out. One was an improved memorandum of understanding with the school and city police. Like in a lot of major cities in the country, school police are directly connected to or are divisions of the regular city police department. When that happens, it becomes very difficult to hold them accountable. It becomes very difficult to have a say in the way they go about doing their work inside of schools, the policies they choose to implement in the schools, and just the overall issue of when a young person feels their rights have been violated, how do they address that? If the school, they can't go to the principal and they can't really go to the police, there were no vehicles for how to do that. The MOU looked at trying to improve that relationship and create those vehicles for accountability where students could feel like they had some sort of say and some sort of defense if they felt that their rights were being violated. Also, in those reports, there was language for a new model discipline code was in there. Students have been calling for a new code of conduct for the longest. They felt that the old code of conduct was just excessive with suspensions. It just left little room for leeway. You have students who, in our Promise Academies here in Philadelphia, they have to wear uniforms. Coming to school without your tie for the young men is an automatic suspension. Coming to school late, automatic suspension. Walking around in the halls of the past, automatic suspension. A lot of minor offenses just led to automatic suspensions. And the young people just felt like that was excessive, it wasn't fair, and something else needed to be done. So they tried to draft language for a model discipline code that they felt was a lot fairer for them and made much more sense and did more to keep students in school as opposed to pushing them out. Again, that was drafted with the help from the Advancement Project, the ACLU, and the Education Law Center. They basically took the young people's reports, their surveys, everything that they were saying that they needed in their school and what they wanted to change, and were able to put that in language that would be able to fit for the district and for a district code. Around the same time, the Campaign for Nonviolent Schools also creates a platform. And in its platform, there's a call for restorative practices and a reduction of suspension and expulsions. Again, trying to find positive alternatives to out-of-school suspensions with the goal of keeping students in school and not pushing them out. So then, once we have all this data, and ultimately which proves what students had been saying, that suspensions don't help, that suspensions don't work in terms of making schools safer or in terms of keeping, making students study harder, what it does is pushes more and more students out of school and into the justice system, and specifically, disproportionately, right, Black and Latino students. So with that data, the next thing to do was, of course, to organize. And the picture you see here is a 2,000-person march down Broad Street here in Philadelphia on Martin Luther King Day, 2009, where 2,000 people, students, teachers, unions like the SEIU, Unite Here, joined in calling for nonviolent schools and addressing the structural violence of underfunding of our communities, underfunding of schools, right, and finding positive alternatives to discipline in our schools and making schools safer for everyone, students, staff, and everyone in between. Okay. So the strategy that went into that organizing. I started out here saying that we pushed really hard to create an opening. And what I mean by opening is that we're presented with an opportunity. The school district had to create a new discipline code. They were going to revise the new discipline code, and this was our opportunity to have a say in that and implement the code that we wanted to see, right? We being youth organizations and primarily the young people that I'm on the call representing. But that opening had to be created. We had to push really hard to create that opportunity. So that started with us identifying targets. So we work with the young people, identify who are the people who can give us what we want, who are the people who can make those changes that we needed in that discipline code. And what identified was a school reform commission, which in Philadelphia, because Philadelphia is a state-controlled school system, is a 5-member board, the SRC members, 3 appointed by the governor, 2 appointed by the mayor, the superintendent, and then the city council members as secondary targets. As an overall tactic, what we really relied on were relationships, building those relationships among the allies and among our coalition members, coupled with constant messaging and pressure on why zero tolerance doesn't work, right? So using the data that we got combined with the personal stories from the students who lived those experiences and constantly pushing that message by pushing back against the national media and the national dialogue of just students don't care, students are just inherently violent, and they all need to be locked up anyway. So this starts out with Youth United for Change started to work with their relationships with the city councils that they had to really push on the issue of zero tolerance. This is following the release of their reports on zero tolerance and working with city councilors, city council members, right, to really take up the issue of zero tolerance. So because of the pressure city council was putting on the school district, ultimately the district had to respond, and zero tolerance was removed from the district language. They couldn't justify why having zero tolerance policies, or at least the language in their code, given the reports and the data that YC had presented, right? So they ultimately just removed that language from the district altogether. The new SRC that was voted in started to feel a lot of pressure. Like I said, then we had embattled Superintendent Arlene Ackerman, who just had a horrible relationship with the city administration, horrible relationship with parents and students and teachers. Everyone didn't like her. She ultimately had to leave. It was a big black eye for the school district. They voted a new SRC, and this new SRC felt a strong pressure to show that they were listening to the community. So to demonstrate they were listening to the community around this issue, they created a safety committee. That safety committee includes members of the SRC, district staff, community stakeholders, members of the Campaign for Nonviolent Schools, and also the Education Law Center. On that safety committee, the ELC started to push for a policy review, right, of the Code of Conduct. They raised the issue of this Code of Conduct and why it needed to change. At the same time, CNS is also pushing for more student engagement around the code, right, saying that young people need to be a part of that process, that young people and students who live those decisions made by adults need to be a part of the decision-making process and the drafting of language for a code that they're the ones who are ultimately going to have to live with. Again, this is also done with the help of the Education Law Center in creating that language that the district could ultimately use. And then we get ultimately to the victory. So in response to the pressure, as I say, that was the inside game. On the outside, there were a lot of demonstrations. There were rallies. There was a 2,000-person march led by students. It was constant outside pressure in the media pushing back on the narrative that was being put out there by the national media, and also just pushing back on the district and their, and their lack of response to student voice and student needs. What that led to then was, because of our relationship on the safety committee, but also the pressure that we were putting on the outside, when the district created drafted language for this new code, it was first sent to the youth organizations. It was first sent to the student organizations and the community group to see if this worked. The language that they first put out did not work, and a meeting was called, a face-to-face meeting with students and district staff was called, where the students themselves spoke to the district staff and told them why this language doesn't work. And not only does it work, but here's language that does work for us and that you guys should use. They took that language, and ultimately, when it came time for the vote, the SRC voted on implementing the code that the students, along with our legal allies, drafted up and voted on. That came again because of the constant pressure, the press conferences, the rallies, and the inside working with all our different allies to create that opening and take advantage of that opening again. Not only did they do that, but on the day of the vote, before they voted, the young people asked them to stop voting because they wanted to add one more piece, which was around transgender young people and the uniform policy. We have gender nonconforming and transgender youth who felt that the uniform policy didn't really respect them and respect their identity, and didn't feel that they should be forced to put on the uniform that the district felt they should be wearing. the young people at that meeting pushed that that language needs to be put in there and that the clause needs to be put in for transgender youth and gender nonconforming young people, that they would not be punished for not adhering to uniform codes that they felt did not respect their identity. And in that meeting, the SRC took time, language was drafted, and it was also added and ultimately voted in, and that was the code that we won. And I'll stop right there.
Great, thanks, Hiram. That's amazing. The victory in Philadelphia is inspiring, to say the very least. So as many of you probably know, in March of this year, the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights released data from their Civil Rights Data Collection, or the CRDC, that showed that without any equivocation, that Black and Latino students are the subjects of disparate discipline policies. Among the results, some of the results, they found that across all school districts, African American students were over 3.5 times more likely to be suspended or expelled than their white peers. They also found that over 70% of the students who were either involved in school-related arrests or referred to law enforcement were either Latino or African American. According to the data, 1 in 5 African American boys and more than 1 in 10 African American girls received out-of-school suspensions. And this was really disheartening, 1 in 4 Black children with disabilities were suspended at least once in the 2009-2010 school year. Hiram just talked about how student organizers in Philadelphia, specifically Philadelphia Student Union and Youth United for Change, went from being mad about these horrifying statistics to building a movement for change in their city. And I just want to take 2 seconds to give a shout out to our friends over at Youth United for Change, who I see are retweeting and they are involved. They wanted to be with us today, but there was an unfortunate logistics issue that made it impossible. But they are here with us on Twitter, so I just want to shout out YUC and let you know we see you. So now we've talked a little bit about what they did in Philly. I want to go now and talk about the research and discuss the kinds of data that advocates need to mine and how best to use it to build your movement for justice where you live. So on that note, I am going to turn this over, if I can. I'm going to turn this over to Dan Lowson, if I can get past my technical difficulties.
Hey, I see the sign.
Dan, it's all yours.
Because I'm now the presenter. See, now.
We got Dan.
Okay. So can everybody see? I'm the director of the Center for Civil Rights Remedies at the Civil Rights Project, and I'm hoping that everyone now can see our website.
We sure can.
Great. So I've been working on the issue of the school-prison pipeline at the Civil Rights Project since 1999. And what we have found is that the kind of great work that's going on in Philadelphia and elsewhere, that folks absolutely need the data to bring, whether they're bringing their arguments to state legislators, school board members, or filing complaints with federal or state civil rights agencies. You have to be able to show these injustices for what they are. And the kind of data that we use for our report that I'm going to share with you today is not just our report, but also I'm going to share with you a spreadsheet that you all will have access to and have access to now, and I'll show you how to use that to get information about your district. And then I'll conclude with some recommendations and some other sort of sources to help you get even more recent data, because the data that we're about to look at are from the 2009-10 school year. So if you go to our website, as we're here, and you look at this report, millions of children find the schoolhouse door locked. and I'll click on that. It should open. Okay. And then if you see actually right in the very beginning, you'll see it says to see the report and related spreadsheets, click here. I'm clicking. Okay. And so I'm going to skip the forward, and first I'm going to very briefly show you some of the ways that we put the data that we gathered together to sort of create a persuasive argument. And then I'll show you where you can get the data on your school district from 09-10, and I'll conclude by mentioning some other ways to get newer data. I should point out that soon on our website we'll also have a 50-state review of data. This is federal data that we have, and we have digested it for you. But every state has their own state data, and sometimes it's annual. Some state reports are much better than others. Some states report more than the federal government gives you every other year, and some give much less. And we'll have, hopefully by the end of this week, on our website, sort of a brief report with links to every state's website to show you where you can get the state data. So this is the data that the federal government collects and reports. But like I said, we'll soon have a resource for you for the state data. So let's quickly just look at some of the elements of the report. We digested the data from nearly 7,000 districts from every state and analyzed it and put it in this report. And so I'm skipping over and one of our findings, the finding about the 1 in 4 black students with disabilities was suspended at least once. That was a finding that we found using this same database. It wasn't actually reported by OCR when they released the data to the public. So if you look at this page 15 of our report, you'll see basically, and this is, we do the same calculation with the data. We take the enrollment, so whether it's the enrollment of the school, or in this case of a district, some cases it's a state enrollment, we break it down by race. So we know how many black students are enrolled, for example, and we know the number of black students suspended 1 or more times. And then we divide that number, the number of students suspended 1 or more times, by their total enrollment, and that gives you the percentage of students from that racial group that were suspended at least once. So it's a very simple calculation, and it's the same calculation every time. And so with that kind of information, what we found is that in 09-10, 17% of all African American students were suspended, that's K through 12, at least once, compared to, for example, white students, which was only 5% of all white students enrolled. So that's just an example, and we find that putting the data, and if you were going to school board or filing a complaint, putting the data in sort of graphic terms really helps drive the injustice, the racial injustice home. So if you look at on the top of this page 16 of our report, it's a little hard to read, but when you download the report, it's easier. 25%, this is where of black students with disabilities were suspended at least once, versus compared to 16% of black students without disabilities. So a huge.
And let me just interrupt you for one quick second, because I don't know if other people can see the spreadsheet. I think right now we're only looking at your website.
Oh, you can't see? Oh, okay.
But we can see that you wanted to download it, but we just can't see the data yet.
Oh, all right. So I was sort of, why don't we, I'll go to the spreadsheet then, because that worked yesterday. So tell me if it, so I was going over the report. You can download the report, and the main take-home message is there's a simple way to calculate the data that's very straightforward that everybody could use. And so when you request your data from your school or district, you can make the same calculations, and you can look at our national report to see the different ways that we present it, and you might find that to be useful. So let me show you, though, where to get your own data. So if you are we back on our website? So if you hit national data, and I open this, now if this worked yesterday, it should open and tell me if, are you seeing an Excel spreadsheet starting to open?
Right now, no. What you may have to do is switch over to sharing Excel, because I think right now you're sharing Firefox. So that's probably why we can't see it.
Oh, okay. So share, it says share application. I see. Scroll over Microsoft Excel. How about now? Can you see it now?
We've got it. Just enlarge it, and we've got it.
All right. So everyone on the phone now, later today or whenever it suits you, can go and get this spreadsheet. And you'll have it. Save it on your computer and own it. So I just want to show you some of the features. So under column A, we've organized all the districts that, and there's not every district is there. All the districts with over 3,000 students is in the sample, but not every school or not every district is represented. About 85% of all students are represented in these districts. So you'll see on the column A is the state. So they're organized by state alphabetically. And what this allows you to do is to look at, let's say we wanted to pick out a district in, we wanted to find out in the nation which districts are suspending much higher numbers of black students compared to white students. So under column E, you could click on that little arrow and you sort this black-white gap that tells you what percentage of black students were being suspended minus the percentage of white students, and that gives you the difference, and that's what's being reported here. And you'll find here, now, so we have Bell County, Kentucky. There's a difference in suspension rates where black students, 63, almost 64 percentage points difference. That's huge. East Jasper, Mississippi. So it's basically sorting all the districts in the nation. If you go over to column A, you'll see all these different states. So these are school districts sorted by, in this case, the differences between what's happening to black students and white students. Now, if that may not be the most important thing for you to look at. Let's say I wanted to know what districts are suspending the highest percentage of Latino students. So now you notice I'm going over to column K, and again I go on that little arrow and I hit descending. So it's going to resort all those districts in the nation. And you'll see that there are some that 100% means that every Latino student in that district was suspended at least one time. Now, in some cases, when you see really high numbers, it may be because there are very few students, Latino students, and they all were suspended. So you can scroll over to find out, is that the case? So in the case of East Jasper, there were 5 Latino students suspended, but you keep saying you can check the enrollment. Well, there were only 5 students who are Latino who were enrolled. So in that case, these numbers are rounded off to the nearest 5. So it's a little bit misleading because in terms of the impact on Latino students, there are probably others on this list that have much higher enrollments that are suspending lots of Latino students. So let's go to, for example, I know there are a number of people from Ohio. Let's see what that one looks like. 50% of the Latino students in Mount Vernon, in Trotwood, Madison City. Oh, there are only 10 Latinos. So let's go down to, let's see, there's Hartford, Connecticut, or let's look at, what's this one? Holyoke, Massachusetts. I know there's at least one person from Massachusetts on the line. So there are 1,590 Latino students that were suspended. There were enrolled 4,575 Latino students enrolled. And then you can see that this is scrolling back over. Combined, the suspension rate for Latinos was 34.8%. That means about 35 out of every 100 enrolled Latino students in K through 12 were suspended at least once. See, the black suspension rate is even higher, 36%, and the white suspension rate was high, but not nearly as high. So that's just an example of how you can sort this. Now, let's say you just want to compare in your state. So we go back to column A, and where it says select all, you click that off. Now all the states are blank, and let's say we want to just look at Michigan. Now, there were a number of people from Michigan on this call, so at least 3. So now the spreadsheet is only looking at the districts in Michigan. All the other ones are just hidden. They're still in the database. And let's look at students with disabilities. So if you look at the bottom, there are these tabs, all students, students with disabilities, students without disabilities. You can look at the 100 largest districts. You can look at the states. You can look at where there are errors. Like if you don't see your district, I'd check the error tab, because some of the errors, some districts reported suspending more students than they enrolled. Florida had a lot of errors, but we were able to fix Florida and Hawaii by getting a different source for the enrollment data. And so we put that in a separate tab, since you won't, all the other information on here, you can find the source of the information at the U.S. Department of Ed's Office for Civil Rights. So let's look at students with disabilities. So I'm switching the tabs at the bottom here. Now we're looking at, wait, it didn't switch. I'm getting my mail. That's not what I want to do. Hold on, I'm going to bit. Okay, students with disabilities. There we go. And again, it's now reset, so I'm looking at all the districts in all the states. And I just want to look at Michigan, so I go back and I hit select all, which actually deselects since select all was already there. And I scroll down, I find Michigan, hit that, and now you see all the districts in Michigan. So within the state of Michigan, I can compare districts, and I can find which, if I'm an advocate, I'm working at the state level, or I know I have constituents in certain districts, I can say, okay, let's go back to looking at the black students, and these are black students with disabilities. And again, we took the number that were suspended and divided by their enrollment. So we can now rank order, and we'll find on the left, now we see the different districts, including Flint City. Some of them are very large, they're different sizes, and then again, you can scroll over and you can see the number of students suspended at least once, and then the next scroll over further and you can see the number of students enrolled who have a disability, and you can see under black that there, the worst district only had 5 black students with disabilities, but there are districts near like Flint City, there were 1,350 black students with disabilities, and they suspended quite a few of them. They suspended 800 of those students at least one time. And so that's where you get the percentage for Flint City for black students, and nearly 60%, 59.3% of the black students with disabilities in Flint City were suspended out of school. That's K through 12. Now we've done other reports where we looked at all the middle schools together, and there's a way to get that kind of information, or just the high schools. And what you'll usually find is that the district level data, when they include the elementary schools, those numbers are going to be lower than when you just look at middle schools or just look at high schools. It's extremely disturbing information, and we really wanted to get this into everybody's hands. So this is, eventually our website will have a tool on it where you can just plug in the name of your district and get the graphs like you saw in the national report, or that you didn't see, but you could see if you download our national report. Well, in other words, further digesting your data for you to help help you along. And you could ask for maybe some additional information. We can link to sources, your state website source for additional discipline data, that sort of thing. So we're working towards having a section of our website dedicated to this web tool. It's not created yet, but I hope by about 9 months from now that will be up and running. So I just wanted to show everybody how to do this. I like to show you, you can also compare states by going down to the state tab. And again, all these suspension rates can be sorted. The problem with some of the state data is that it's based on a sample, and in some states 100% of the districts are represented, but there are states where they only looked at 60% of the school districts. So the 100% sample is great. The ones that are just 60%, you know, when you rank order your states, it might not be accurate. So I just want to caution not to put too much weight into the state rankings, but it does give you a good sense of what's going on in your state. And you'll find, the other thing this is good for is you may find districts that aren't suspending a whole lot of black kids or a whole lot of kids with disabilities, and that's important in making your arguments. So one of the things we point out in the national report, we looked at, and you'll find there's a section where we looked at the worst districts in the country for each racial group, but we also found that, you know, there are 1,400 school districts across the country where less than 3% or less of all black students were suspended. In other words, we need to sort of bust the myth that we need to be suspending lots of kids out of school. In fact, there are a lot of schools in every state, there are a lot of districts in every state where they're not suspending a lot of students. So somehow people have their districts that are still using suspension really as a measure of last resort and doing it in a wise way, but there are a whole lot of districts where they have just gone crazy and are kicking kids out right and left. So I think I'm probably nearing the end of my portion of the hour. So one of the things I just want to point out is that these data are from 09-10. With Dignity in Schools, we just did a webinar, and I think it's on their website, on how to get your district data for the most recent school year, for the 2011-12 year. And there's a webinar plus a template of a request for data form that you can send to your school district, and it's for this same data. And so you can get the most recent information, and as you'll see if you read the report, it's very easy to digest. I'm also going to be available. I work with Dignity in Schools and Schott Foundation and the Opportunity to Learn campaign. So there'll be additional information available to assist you in terms of digesting the data. But in this case, for 09-10, we've digested all the data on out-of-school suspensions. So I'll turn it back over to you guys, and I'm happy to also answer questions, or if you have emails for questions specific to your district, I'd be happy to answer them.
Great. Thank you, Dan. We really appreciate it. That is amazing. And I wanted to say that we have a comment from, it looks like from Pamela, who said she loves this tool and she's looking forward to the full package being seen online. So a lot of people, a lot of interest in the data and wanting to be able to use it. And for those of you that are interested, after sometime tomorrow, we'll have the recording of this webinar and the tools and data that we referenced. They will be available on the OTL website, so you'll be able to take a look at it and use it.
Oh, so, I should add one last thing, Andrea, that there is on our website, in addition to having the spreadsheets that I just showed you, there is a set of instructions so all the things that I just said, if some people need to read it, you can download the set of instructions and we'll tell you exactly how to use that spreadsheet.
Great. Thank you so much. So Hiram sort of laid out what's going on with Philly and how they brought about their use of data to make a movement happen. Dan has shared with us the data that we can use and what to do with it. But like all good things, it might seem really simple to do this work, and unfortunately, it's not that simple. So I want to throw it back to Hiram because there are some cautionary tales, and I want to make sure that he sort of shares those with you from his experience in Philly. So Hiram, it is all yours.
Okay, great. You can't see my PowerPoint, right?
I am not seeing anything right now. Hang on just a second.
I can just start talking while you do that.
That's perfect.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry, you just sent me something.
And I've given you the privileges back. Sorry about that.
Okay. So basically, there were just some takeaways. I just want to end with some takeaways that we learned. Right? This was not easy at all. Like I said, it was a 2-year campaign, and it was a lot of work that we were dealing with, that we had to, and a lot of obstacles and hurdles that we had to jump. But the way we were able to get through that was was finding that balance between an inside and outside strategy. And this is where the secondary target thing comes into. We had to identify key city council members who we knew were going to be on our side, who could apply that political pressure and who could apply that pressure from city government on the school district to start addressing the issues of school discipline, right? And not just kind of in a reactionary way to whatever would pop up out of the national media, right? But really look into this and really listen to the folks on the ground who are doing this work and who are stakeholders in the schools and affected by these issues, right? So that was one. Also, utilizing our role on the safety committee. A lot of times folks can get caught up and seeing your appointment on a particular committee, right, or the school system or the city giving you some sort of space within their world of where they're realm as being the victory in of itself, right? So we never saw being asked to join the safety committee as the victory. It was only a vehicle to get us to that victory, right? And we're very clear about that this doesn't mean that we won, right? It was just a step to get there. And that's why we maintain our outside strategy. And while we had these relationships with district folks, and they were cordial, and with a lot of them, they were good, there were some of them that were just not so good, we maintained true to our organizing roots, and we kept that outside pressure on them always, letting them know that we appreciate this and that we're willing to sit and engage and negotiate and work with you and talk this out with you, right, but that we're not going to accept that as the victory, right? We have a goal, and that is the goal that we're aiming towards. So it's finding that balance between the inside and the outside, and then picking and choosing, right, and being very good and careful about who you are choosing as your ally, right? So we say secondary targets, but those targets weren't, we weren't attacking them out in the press. We weren't mobilizing against them. What we were doing was building strategic relationships with them. So there were strategic relationships built with folks inside the school district, right, who could help move our message, right, so that when we weren't there, there were staff people for the SRC members who were constantly delivering our message and constantly keeping our demands and our message in their minds. So when we would come to these meetings or we'd come to these actions, right, it wasn't like new and we'd have to reinvent the wheel again because this was constantly happening whether we were there or not by way of these strategic alliances that we had made. The other thing was building strong relationships amongst our allies. Like I said, the issue at South Philadelphia High School was a terrible one, and it was one that could have divided us permanently. And instead what happened was that we found a way to develop relationships with the organizations that were working primarily with the Asian students, right, to build that trust and to build that relationship with them and to let them know that we are all committed to safe schools for the students, safe schools for the staff in the building, safe schools for the teachers, right, and making sure that you develop that trust and build on that trust. YUC and PSU are the only organizing groups inside the Campaign for Nonviolent Schools. The rest are either youth development organizations or legal advocates, right, that don't do organizing. So what we had to do was respect that, right, not expect that everyone can do what we do or that everyone is willing to do what we do, and instead just focus on the strength. Focus on the strength of each group, right, and instead of tearing each other down or you're not doing this, you're not doing that, right, or being too concerned about who gets the recognition who gets to shine, right? Being committed to the ultimate goal and letting folks play into their strengths and using their strengths to keep moving this along, right? So on one side you'd have Advancement Project and the Ed Law Center, right, doing their thing in terms of like drafting language and going over the legal stuff. On the other side, you had organizations like PSU and NYUC leading actions and mobilizations and doing that, right, and meeting with elected officials. On the other side, you had other organizations who were working with community groups, right, and working with their members and really doing the work that needed to get them in a place to where they could be in coalition with other groups who they thought, or probably would never thought they had something in common with, right? So that was really important. Like I said, identifying the secondary targets, I can't emphasize that enough. Having folks who you can go to who can either feed you information from the inside and who can also push that message for you on the inside. Again, we're battling the national media and the national media's perception of young people, specifically Black and Latino young people. So this was really important. And finally, to stay determined and don't give up. We know we're right. The young people we work with know firsthand what happened in the schools. They know what those experiences are, right? We know what's happening. We know what needs to be done, right? The students can tell you very clearly what they need in their schools. And you know you're right, and you'll be persuaded that you're wrong and that, you know, folks will pull out all kinds of statistics and all kinds of reasons why this can't be done. For us, it was a budget crisis where there's no money, where there's no money, where there's no money. And we didn't let that take us off our path and our goal. It took us 2 years, but 2 years later, we have a new code. We've got a code that respects students, that respects students who are gender nonconforming, and it's only a first step. We're still committed to keep pushing for more and more to make sure that we ultimately make nonviolent schools for everyone in the building, like I said, the students, the staff, the teacher, and everyone involved.
That is fantastic. Thank you so much, Hiram. I'm going to go ahead, and I know we are over 3 o'clock, and I wanted us to make sure that we began and ended on time, and sadly we didn't, but there are a couple of questions, so I want to make sure I ask those. And I know some of you have already said that you are going to be logging off, which is fine. We're so glad that you were able to join us, but you will be able to catch this webinar in its entirety. We will have it posted on the OTL website sometime tomorrow. So if you missed anything from beginning or end, you'll be able to catch it again tomorrow, along with the pre-reading and resources, et cetera, and links to the different information we've talked about. So there have been a couple of questions, as I said. Let me see if I can get them all. One question came from, looks like, Brandon asked the question about, to Hiram, I believe. He wanted to know a little bit about the capacity of your organization that you needed throughout the 2 years. How many individuals, organizers, and others from an organizational perspective did it take, and how much money did they spend in your struggle?
How much money did the district spend? Or did
how much did you all spend in your campaign? Because he wants to know about your organizational capacity. What did it take to engage in this fight?
Right. So at PSU, we have, staff dedicated to, so we had one organizer who was dedicated to the Campaign for Nonviolent Schools. Capacity varies from organization to organization. So at PSU, we have 3 organizers, 7 high school chapters. YUC, I believe, has about 3 or 4 organizers and about the same number of high school chapters. Some of the organizations inside of the Campaign for Nonviolent Schools may have 1 organizer, or they may have a staff person who's not an organizer and they don't have a base in the way we do, right? They don't organize the students, so their capacities are different, right? And for those groups, that's when we had folks like Ed Law Center, ACLU, Advancement Project, who don't organize folks, but in turn they have researchers, right, or a researcher who can help do this. So I think a lot of the organizing stuff fell on PSU and YUC shoulders because we had more of a capacity to do that, where the other organizations had more capacity to do some of the media work or some of the research work or some of that. So for PSU, so you have 10 organizations and campaigns for nonviolent schools, 2 of them being organizing groups. I would say there was about maybe 3 organizers committed to launch this campaign, and a number of young people. You know, we'd have events a 2,000-person march, and most of our press conferences were probably about, I would say, 50 young people at the time, rallies and press conferences, 50 young people at the time. The same would be for YUC. In terms of how much money we spent, I don't know if we ever put a price tag on how much we spent for that. So it's a little difficult for me to answer.
Well, so on a related question, maybe this one might be a little easier. Pamela wants to know, where did you all get the funding for the organizational piece? So are there philanthropic organizations or other groups that have been supportive financially or in kind with the efforts there in Philly?
Yes. So in terms of our funding for our safety work, a lot of the funding for us comes from the Just and Fair Schools Fund and the Campaign for Black Male Achievement. And that a lot of that money goes to, so CNS has a coordinator. So a lot of the funding goes to, so if I had to break it down to answer the original question of how much money it's worth, there's money that goes to pay for the coordinator of the campaign, and then there's monies that go into the actions, the printing, the materials for all that. It goes up into the thousands of dollars. The actual work itself doesn't cost money. A lot of money goes to the infrastructure, right? The salaries of the positions of the individuals who are doing the work. The actual work itself didn't cost a lot of money. But the clear answer is the funding for us comes from Just and Fair Schools and the Campaign for Black Male Achievement.
Fantastic. And we've, unfortunately, we only have time for one more question, and this one comes from, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Lizzie. She wants to know, Hiram, if did CNS work with teachers unions? Why or why not? And also, she wanted to know if the participants can get a copy of the CNS Citywide Survey of High School Students and or a copy of the Model Discipline Code drafted with ACLU, AP, and ELC.
To answer the first question regarding the teachers union, CNS is in the process of engaging the teachers union and working on this issue. In the beginning, we didn't work with the teachers union. The school safety and school discipline tends to be one of those hurdles that stands, or those obstacles stands in the way sometimes between student groups and the teachers union and teachers, right? And I think that it's very easy for us to fall into this, it's falling into two poles, right? Or assuming that we're on opposite sides of the same issue. When you have issues of school closings, right, and like we see in a lot of our major cities, right, when they use school discipline and test scores and all that as precursors for shutting down a school, a lot of times you'll find that the union and principals, not just the teachers, but principals are pretty reluctant in engaging in those conversations or dealing with the issue of school discipline or tracking all that, because they feel that it'll just basically highlight them, right, or highlight some of the things that are going wrong that are not their fault. Again, it's a structural, there's structural violence, right, the underfunding, the under-resourcing of the schools, but that ultimately they're the ones who are held accountable for that and could lead to their schools being shut down. So that's something that we're trying to navigate. As we're trying to get this code implemented and the restorative practices putting in, we recognize that teachers are going to need a lot of support, and teachers are going to need services and training to be able to help do this. And this is where we're going to try to work with the teachers union to bring them on board as partners, not as adversaries, not as folks on the opposite side of this debate, but as partners into what do teachers need, right, on their side to help create a safe school. So we didn't start out with the teachers union, but we're definitely in conversations with them now to figure out how can we be partners moving forward in the struggle and ultimately ending suspensions. What was the second part of that question?
The second part was asking about getting a copy of the CNS Citywide Survey of High School Students,
yes,
and or a copy of the Model Discipline Code.
Yes. So I can definitely do that. I can either send it to you, Tina, or folks can email me directly at Hiram, HIRAM, at phillystudentunion.org. And I can definitely send out all that information.
And we can also make sure to list that on the OTL website, on the webinar page for this webinar, so that folks can have that in one place. They can link right to it. So I want to thank Hiram and Dan once again for being with us. This has been amazing, and just the feedback on Twitter and in the chat box, it seems like a lot of people really found the information useful, so that's fantastic. And I just want to once again give a huge shout out to Philadelphia Student Union and Youth United for Change for the efforts that you secured, and for the other youth organizers across the country who this year have seen some success as it relates to the issue of school discipline policies. We've seen some successes this year in Illinois and in California and in Colorado, just to name a few. So I just want to give a huge shout out to the youth organizers who've been involved in those processes and let you know that we see you and we've got your back. And we're looking forward to seeing some more success stories in the coming up. So now I want to go ahead and thank all of the participants for your questions and thank our presenters for a really robust and insightful conversation. We usually end these webinars with some kind of an action step, and today is not going to be an exception. We want to encourage all of you to check out the Solutions Not Suspensions website, which was referenced earlier in the webinar, and sign our pledge that shows your support for Solutions Not Suspensions. We want to also encourage you to read through the Dignity in Schools Model Code on Education and Dignity, and you should see the cover page of that on your screen right now. There you're going to find a framework that you can use to bring about human rights and dignity in your school community, one that includes all relevant stakeholders in the process of keeping our students in the schoolhouse and out of the jailhouse. Also, we encourage you to look for activities taking place during this week of action and get involved. We can't make this nationwide call for action happen without committed advocates like yourselves. Participating in this webinar is only a first step. We need your help in spreading the message and for calling for action. And if you haven't already done so, we encourage you to sign up to receive the biweekly OTL campaign newsletter. You can do so by visiting the OTL website at www.otlcampaign.org. You can also visit us on Facebook and on Twitter, and you can find out all the latest news and information coming out of the Opportunity to Learn campaign. Tell others in your network to visit the website and to join us in our efforts. We want to know what's going on where you live, so please send us news articles, event notifications, and anything else of interest going on that relates to providing an opportunity to learn for all kids. You can send that to info@otlcampaign.org. And your feedback is really important to us as we strive to make these webinars relevant and interesting to our attendees. It's going to guide our future programming and our topic selection, so we really want to make sure that we hear back from you. In the coming days, you're going to receive a survey asking you for your feedback about the webinar. Please take a few moments to fill that out and return it to us, and we thank you in advance for your help with this. The next webinar in our series is going to focus on the recently released Schott Foundation report called The Urgency of Now, the Schott 50-State Report on Public Education in Black Males. Stay tuned for the date in the coming weeks. We'll let you know when that's coming up. If there are topics you'd like to see us cover, or if you'd like to be a webinar presenter, please contact us at the info@otlcampaign.org address. Also, as I said earlier, the recording for today's webinar is going to be available on the OTL website, more likely than not tomorrow, so that if you were unable to catch all of it, you can catch it in full at that point, and please make sure to share it with others who weren't able to join us today. On behalf of the OTL campaign, I'd like to thank Hiram Rivera and Dan Losen for joining us today. And thanks to all of you who signed up to participate in the event. We hope you found this information useful to your advocacy efforts, and we look forward to hearing about the actions you took to bring about solutions, not suspensions, and thus to ensure that our students are given a fair and substantive opportunity to learn. I'm Tina Dove, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.